Hello viewers and welcome to another chapter. As you can see, I am currently camping, so this is the third camping chapter introduced. And speaking of chapters, we've made it! The end of book 4! Can you believe that? I certainly can't. Thank you immensely for your support and listening pleasure. I hope you enjoy the end of Goblet of Fire. So with that said, let's get started, shall we? Chapter 37, The Beginning. When he looked back, even a month later, Harry found that he had only scattered memories of the next few days. It was though as he had been through too much to take in anymore. Oh. Hugging Harry, I can certainly relate. The recollections he did have were very painful. The worst, perhaps, was meeting with the Diggories that took place the following morning. They did not blame him for what happened. On the contrary, both thanked him for returning Cedric's body to them. Mr. Diggory sobbed through most of the interview. Mrs. Diggory's grief seemed to be beyond tears. "He suffered very little then," she said when Harry had told her how Cedric had died. "And after all, he died just when he'd won the tournament. He must have been happy." When they got to their feet, she looked down at Harry and said, "You look after yourself now." Harry seized the sack of gold on the bedside table. "Take this," he muttered to her. "It should have been Cedric's. He got that first. You take it." But she backed away from him. "Oh, no, it's yours, dear. I couldn't. You keep it." "I wish we met Mrs. Diggory in the films. She seems like such a nice lady." Harry returned to Gryffindor Tower the following evening. From what Hermione and Ron told him, Dumbledore had spoken to the school that morning at breakfast. He had merely requested they leave Harry alone, that nobody ask him questions or badger him to tell the story of what happened in the maze. Most people, he noticed, were skirting behind him in the corridors, avoiding his eyes. Some whispered behind their hands as he passed. He guessed that many of them believed Rita Skeeter's article about how disturbed and possibly dangerous he was. Perhaps they were formulating their own theories about how Cedric had died. He found he didn't care very much. He liked it best when he was with Ron and Hermione, and they were talking about other things, or else letting him sit in silence while they played chess. I wonder who's better, Ron or Hermione? Hermione definitely has the strategic mind, but Ron is also a real good chess player. So, at this point, I feel like it could go either way and end up in a stalemate. But what do you guys think? He felt as though all three of them had reached an understanding they didn't need to put into words. That each was waiting for some sign, some word, of what was going on outside Hogwarts, and that it was useless to speculate about what might be coming until they knew anything for certain. The only time they touched upon the subject was when Ron told Harry about a meeting Mrs. Weasley had with Dumbledore before going home. "She wants to ask him if he could come straight to us this summer," he said. "But he wants you to go back to the Dursleys, at least at first." "Why?" said Harry. "He said Dumbledore's got his reasons," said Ron, shaking his head darkly. "I suppose we've got to trust him, haven't we?" The only person apart from Ron and Hermione that Harry felt he was able to talk to was Hagrid. As there was no longer a defense against the dark arts teacher, they had those lessons free. They used the one on Thursday afternoon. Hey, it's Thursday afternoon. To go down and visit Hagrid in his cabin. I'm practically at a cabin now. How ironic. It was a bright and sunny day. Well, it's certainly sunny, even if it's hidden amongst the foliage of the trees. Fang bounded out of the open door as they approached, barking and wagging his tail madly. Okay, pretend my bookmark tassel is a tail. What's up? Called Hagrid, coming to the door. Harry! He strode out to meet them, pulled Harry into a one-armed hug, ruffled his hair, and said, "Good to see you, mate. Good to see you." They saw two bucket-sized. Bucket-sized. Oh, Hagrid, we love you. Cups and saucers on the one table in front of the fireplace when they entered Hagrid's cabin. Been having a couple of Goblet, Hagrid said. You just left. Said Ron curiously. Madam Maxime, of course, said Hagrid. You two made up, have you? Said Ron. Don't know what you're talking about, said Hagrid, airily fetching more cups from the dresser. When he had made tea and offered a plate of doughy cookies, he leaned back in his chair and surveyed Harry closely through his beetle-black eyes. You alright? He said gruffly. Yeah, said Harry. No, you're not, said Hagrid. Of course you're not, but you will be. Harry said nothing. No, he was going to come back, said Hagrid. And Harry, Ron, and Hermione looked up at himself. No one for years, have I? Knew he was hard enough to hide in his time. That's a nice callback to Sorcerer's Stone when he believes that him they're referring to having died is God's fault, in my opinion. To quote Hagrid himself from the films. It had to happen. But now it has. And we'll just have to get on with it. We'll have to fight. Might be able to stop him before he gets a good hold. That's Dumbledore's plan anyway. Great man, Dumbledore. As long as we've got him, I'm not too worried. Hagrid raised his bushy eyebrows at the disbelieving expressions on their faces. No good sitting boy about it, he said. What's coming will come, and we'll meet it when it does. Dumbledore told me what you did, Harry. Hagrid's chest swelled as he looked at Harry. You did as much as your father would have done, and I can give you no higher praise than that. Harry smiled back at him. It was the first time he smiled in days. What's Dumbledore asked you to do, Hagrid? He asked. He sent Professor McGonagall to ask you and Madame Maxime to meet him that night. Gordon did a lot for me over the summer, said Hagrid. Secret, though, not to talk about it, no. No, not even to your right. Told him, Madame Maxime to you. Might be coming with me. I think she will. I think I got her persuaded. Is it to do with Voldemort? Hagrid flinched at the sound of the name. Might be, he said evasively. No. Now who would like to come and visit the Ascot with me? I was joking, he said hastily, seeing the looks on their faces. I would like to imagine their faces going like that. It was with a heavy heart that Harry packed his trunk up in the dormitory on the night before his return to Pivot Drive. He was dreading the leaving feast, which was usually a cause for celebration when the winner of the Inter-House Championship would be announced. He had avoided being in the Great Hall when it was full ever since he left the hospital, preferring to eat when it was nearly empty to avoid the stares of his fellow students. Honestly, I would have that setting throughout the whole term, or at least have a private corridor broken away from the Great Hall to eat at, so I can be at peace and not be overwhelmed. Because if I were to be in the Great Hall and there would be lots of noises, with my autism, it would be far too overwhelming. Moving on. When he, Ron, and Hermione entered the hall, they saw at once that the usual decorations were missing. The Great Hall was normally decorated with the winning house's colors for the leaving feast. Tonight, however, there were black drapes on the wall behind the teacher's table. Harry knew instantly that they were there as a mark of respect to Cedric. The real Mad-Eye Moody was at the staff table now, his wooden leg and magical eye back in place. He was extremely twitchy, jumping every time someone spoke to him. Harry couldn't blame him. I wouldn't either. Moody's fear of attack was bound to have been increased by his 10-month imprisonment in his own trunk. Okay, if I didn't have claustrophobia now, if I were placed in that situation, I definitely would have developed it then. Professor Karkaroff's chair was empty. Harry wondered as he sat downward with the other Gryffindors, where Karkaroff was now, and whether Voldemort had caught up with him. Madame Maxime was still there. She was sitting next to Hagrid. They were talking quietly together. Further along the table, sitting next to Professor McGonagall, was Snape. His eyes lingered on Harry for a moment. As Harry looked at him, his expression was difficult to read. Yeah, most people, when they conceal their emotions, are a little hard to read. I can confirm. He looked as sour and unpleasant as ever. Sour? I think of lemons and limes when I hear sour. Perhaps Harry's thinking of Snape as a lemon? A lemon having Snape's hair, crazy hair, hooked nose, and twisted smiles would be amusing. That would be amusing to say the least. Okay, moving on. Harry continued to watch him, long after Snape had looked away. What was it that Snape had done on Dumbledore's orders, the night that Voldemort had returned? And why was Dumbledore so convinced that Snape was truly on their side? He had been their spy. Dumbledore had said so in the pensive. Snape turned spy against Voldemort at great personal risk. Was that the job he had taken up again? Had he made contact with the Death Eaters, perhaps? Foreshadowing of sorts. Pretended that he had never really gone over to Dumbledore. That he had been like Voldemort himself, biding his time. Harry's musings were ended by Professor Dumbledore, who stood up at the staff table. The Great Hall, which in any case had been less noisy than it usually was at the leaving feast, became very quiet. The end, said Dumbledore, looking around at them all, of another year. He paused and his eyes fell upon the Hufflepuff table. Theirs had been the most subdued table before he had gone to his feet, and theirs were still the saddest and palest faces in the room. I'm hugging the entirety of Hufflepuff table right now. There is much that I would like to say to you all tonight, said Dumbledore. But I must first acknowledge the loss of a very fine person who should be sitting here. He gestured toward the Hufflepuffs, who do not feast with us. I would like you all, please, to stand and raise your glasses to Cedric Diggory. And this would be my involvement. They did it, all of them. The benches scraped as everyone in the hall stood, and raised their goblets, and echoed in one loud, low, rumbling voice. Cedric Diggory. Harry caught a glimpse of Cho through the crowd. There were tears pouring silently down her face. He looked down at the table as they all sat down again. Cedric was a person who exemplified many of the qualities that distinguished Hufflepuff House, Dumbledore continued. He was a good and loyal friend, a hard worker. He valued fair play. His death has affected you all, whether you knew him well or not. I think that you have a right, therefore, to know exactly how it came about. Harry raised his head and stared at Dumbledore. Cedric Diggory was murdered by Lord Voldemort. A panicked whisper swept the great hall. People were staring at Dumbledore in disbelief, in horror. He looked perfectly calm as he watched them mutter themselves into silence. The Ministry of Magic, Dumbledore continued, does not wish me to tell you this. It is possible that some of your parents will be horrified that I have done so, either because they will not believe that Lord Voldemort has returned, or because they think I should not tell you so, young as you are. It is my belief, however, that the truth is generally preferable to lies, and that any attempt to pretend that Cedric died as the result of an accident, or some sort of blunder of his own, is an insult to his memory. Stunned and frightened, every face in the great hall toward Dumbledore now, or almost every face. Over at the Slytherin table, Harry saw Draco Malfoy muttering something to Crabbe. Harry felt a hot, sick swoop of anger in his stomach. He forced himself to look back at Dumbledore. There is somebody else who must be mentioned in connection with Cedric's death, Dumbledore went on. I am talking, of course, about Harry Potter. A kind of ripple crossed the great hall as a few heads turned in Harry's direction before looking back to face Dumbledore. Harry Potter managed to escape Lord Voldemort, said Dumbledore. He risked his own life to return Cedric's body to Hogwarts. He showed, in every respect, the sort of bravery that few wizards have ever shown in facing Lord Voldemort, and for this I honor him. Dumbledore turned gravely to Harry and raised his goblet once more. Nearly everyone in the great hall followed suit. They murmured his name as they had murmured Cedric's, and drank to him. But through a gap in the standing figures, Harry saw that Malfoy, Crabbe, and Glue, along many of the other Slytherins, had remained defiantly in their seats, their goblets untouched. Dumbledore, who possessed no magical eye after all, did not see them. When everyone had once again resumed their seats, Dumbledore continued. The Triwizard aim was to further and promote magical understanding. In light of what has happened, of Lord Voldemort's return, such ties are more important than ever before. Dumbledore looked from Madame Maxime and Hagrid to Lord Delacour and her fellow Beauxbaton students, to Victor Crumb and the Durmstrains at the Slytherin table. Crumb, Harry saw, looked wary, almost frightened, as though he expected Dumbledore to say something harsh. Every guest in this hall, said Dumbledore, and his eyes lingered upon the Durmstrang students, will be welcomed back here at any time, should they wish to come. I say to you all, once again, in the light of Lord Voldemort's return, we are only as strong as we are united, as weak as we are divided. And I have that latter half on a cup of mine that I love dearly. This quote from him also reminds me of Abraham Lincoln, though, a house divided cannot stand. Moving on. Lord Voldemort's gift for spreading discord and enmity is very great. We can fight it only by showing an equally strong bond of friendship and trust. Differences of habit and language are nothing at all if our aims are identical and our hearts are open. It is my belief, and never have I so hoped that I am mistaken, that we are all facing dark and difficult times. Some of you in this hall have already suffered directly at the hands of Voldemort. Many of your families have been torn asunder. A week ago, a student was taken from our midst. Remember, Cedric. Remember, if the time should come when you have to make a choice between what is right and what is easy. Remember what happened to a boy who was good, kind, and brave, because he strayed across the path of Voldemort. Remember Cedric Diggory. Harry's trunk was packed. Hedwig was back in her cage on top of it. He, Ron, and Hermione were waiting in the crowded entrance hall with the rest of the fourth years for the carriages that would take them back to Hogsmeade Station. It was another beautiful summer's day. Well, it's not summer here quite yet, but it's definitely sunny and suited for the beautifulness, I would say. He supposed that Pivot Drive would be hot and leafy, its flower beds a riot of color. When he arrived there that evening, the thought gave him no pleasure at all. Oh, Harry, I feel your dreadness. I feel your dreadedness. I don't know if dreadedness is a word, but I just made it up if it's not. Basically, it means the act of being dreaded over something. Moving on. Harry! Harry! He looked around. Lord Delacour was hurrying up the stone steps into the castle. Beyond her, far across the grounds, Harry could see Hagrid helping Madame Maxime to the back two of the giant horses into their harness. The Beauxbaton carriage was about to take off. We will see each other again, I hope, said Flora as she reached him, holding out her hand. I am hoping to get stuff here to improve my English. It's very good already, said Ron in a strangled sort of voice. Flora smiled at him. Hermione scowled. So Flora, I definitely love your character. I hope I'm doing your voice actress Clemence Posey justice. And I'm gonna use the French term for this. Hopefully you know what it means. Au revoir, Harry, said Fleur, turning to go. It has been a pleasure meeting you. Harry's spirits couldn't help but lift slightly as he watched Fleur hurry back across the lawns to Madame Maxime, her silvery hair rippling in the sunlight. Wonder how the Durmstrang students are getting back, said Ron. Do you reckon they can steal their ship without cover-up? Goblet did not steal, said a gruff voice. His statements haven't left us to the work. Crumb had come to say goodbye to Hermione. But I have a word, he asked her. Yes, right, said Hermione, looking slightly flustered and following Crumb through the crowd and out of sight. You'd better hurry up, Ron called loudly after her. The carriages will be here in a minute. He let Harry keep a watch for the carriages, however, and spent the next few minutes craning his neck over the crowd to try and see what Crumb and Hermione might be up to. They returned soon. Ron stared at Hermione, but her face was quite impassive. I like Diggory, said Crumb abruptly to her. He was always polite to me, always, even though I was from Dumbledore with cover, he added, scowling. Have you got a new headmaster yet? Said Harry. Crumb shrugged. He held out his hand as for Helen, shook Harry's hand, then nodded. Ron looked as though he was suffering some sort of painful eternal struggle. Crumb had already started walking away when Ron burst out. Can I have your autograph? Oh, Ron. We love you. Hermione turned away, smiling at the horseless carriages that were now trundling toward them up the drive, as Crumb, looking surprised but gratified, signed a fragment of parchment for Ron. I have a headcanon that Ron has that framed somewhere, so on a wall in his room. And he keeps it on a wall after he crap, it's gonna be spoilers. After he and his significant other got married. I had to put it delicately not to spoil anything. Moving on. The weather could not have been more different on the journey back to King's Cross than it had been on their way to Hogwarts the previous September. There wasn't a single cloud in the sky. Harry, Ron, and Hermione had managed to get a compartment to themselves. Hedwig was once again hidden under Ron's dress robes to stop him from hooting continually. Hedwig was dozing, her head under her wing, and Crookshanks was curled up in a spare seat like a large furry ginger cushion. That's Taz when he's cuddled up, that's for sure. Harry, Ron, and Hermione talked more fully and freely than they had all week as the train sped them southward. Harry felt as though Dumbledore's speech at the leaving feast had unblocked him somehow. It was less painful to discuss what happened now. They broke up their conversation about what action Dumbledore might be taking, even now to stop Voldemort, only when the lunch trolley arrived. When Hermione returned from the trolley and put Hermione back into her school bag, she just watched a copy of the Daily Prophet that she had been carrying in there. Harry looked at it, unsure of whether he really wanted to know what it might say, but Hermione, seeing him look at it, said calmly, "There's nothing in there. You can look for yourself, but there's nothing at all. I've been checking every day. Just a small piece the day after the third test saying you won the tournament. You didn't even mention Cedric. Nothing about any of it, if you ask me, but just forcing them to keep quiet." "I'll never keep Rita quiet," said Harry. "Not on a story like this." "But Rita hasn't written anything at all since the third task," said Hermione in an oddly constrained voice. "As a matter of fact," she added, her voice now trembling slightly, "Rita Skeeter isn't going to be writing anything at all for a while. Not unless she wants me to spill the beans on her." "What are you talking about?" said Ron. "I found out how she was listening in on private conversations when she wasn't supposed to be coming onto the grounds," said Hermione in a rush. Harry had the impression that Hermione had been dying to tell him this for days, but that she had restrained herself in light of everything else that happened. "How was she doing it?" said Harry at once. "How did you find out?" said Ron, staring at her. "Well, it was you, really, who gave me the idea, Harry," she said. "Did I?" said Harry, perplexed. "Oh, bugging," said Hermione heavily. "But you said they didn't work." "Oh, not electronic bugs," said Hermione. "No, you see, Rita Skeeter," Hermione's voice trembled with quiet triumph, "is an unregistered animagus. She can turn—" Hermione pulled a small sealed glass jar out of her bag. "Into a beetle." "You're kidding," said Ron. "You haven't. She's not—" "Oh, yes, she is," said Hermione happily, brandishing the jar at them. I love Hermione. Inside were a few twigs and leaves, with one large fat beetle. "That's never—" "You're kidding," Ron whispered, lifting the jar to his eyes. "No, I'm not," said Hermione, beaming. "I caught her on the windowsill in the hospital. Look very closely, and you'll notice the markings around her antenna are exactly like those foul glasses she wears." And for a little visual, there's the illustration for you guys. Harry looked and saw that she was quite right. He also remembered something. "There was a beetle in the statue that night we heard Hagrid tell Madame Maxime about his mum." "Exactly," said Hermione. "And Victor pulled a beetle out of my hair after we had a conversation by the lake. And unless I'm very much mistaken, Rita was perched on the windowsill of the divination class at the day your scar hurt. She's been buzzing around for stories all year. When we saw Malfoy under that tree," said Ron slowly, "he was talking to her, in his hand," said Hermione. "He knew, of course. That's how she's been getting all those nice and interesting little interviews with the Slytherins. They wouldn't care that she was doing something illegal, as long as they were giving horrible stuff about us and Hagrid." Hermione took the glass jar back from Ron and smiled at the beetle, which was angrily against the glass. "I've told her I'll let her out when we get back to London," said Hermione. "I've put an unbreakable charm on the jar, you see, so she can't transform." Again, I love Hermione. She is very clever. And as Lupin puts, well, Hermione. Really are the clever switch of your age. And I've told her she's to keep her quill to herself for a whole year. See if she can't break the habit of writing horrible lies about people. Smiling serenely, Hermione placed the beetle back inside her school bag. The door of the compartment slid open. "Very clever, Granger," said Draco Malfoy. Crabbe and Goyle were standing behind him, all three of them looking more pleased with themselves, more arrogant, and more menacing than Harry had ever seen them. "So," said Malfoy slowly, advancing slightly into the compartment and looking slowly around at them, a smirk quivering on his lips. "You've caught some pathetic reporter, and Potter's Dumbledore's favorite boy, a big deal." His smirk widened. Crabbe and Goyle leered. "Trying not to think about it, aren't we?" said Malfoy softly, looking around at all three of them. "Trying to pretend it hasn't happened." "Get out," said Harry. He had not been this close to Malfoy since he had watched him muttering to Crabbe and Goyle during Dumbledore's speech about Cedric. He could feel a kind of ringing in his ears. His hand gripped his wand under his robes. "You've picked the losing side, Potter. I warned you. I told you you ought to choose your company more carefully, remember? When we met on the train, first day at Hogwarts. I told you not to hang around with riffraff like this." He jerked his head at Ron and Hermione. "Too late now, Potter. They'll be the first to go. And now the Dark Lord's back. My Bloods and Muggle lovers first. Well, second." Diggory was the... It was though as someone had exploded a box of fireworks within the compartment. Blinded by the blaze of spells that had blasted from every direction, deafened by a series of bangs. Okay. Bang! 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 Harry blinked and looked down at the floor. Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle were all lying unconscious in the doorway. He, Ron, and Hermione were on their feet, all three of them having used a different hex. Nor were they the only ones to have done so. "Thought we'd see what those three were up to," said Fred matter-of-factly, stepping onto Goyle and into the compartment. He had his wand out, and so did George, who was careful to tread on Malfoy as he followed Fred inside. "Interesting effect," said George, looking down at Crabbe. "Who used the Fernulus curse?" "Me," said Harry. "Odd," said George lightly. "I use jelly legs." "Looks as though those two shouldn't be mixed." I'm sorry, but it's so funny. "Looks as though those two shouldn't be mixed. He seems to have sprouted into tentacle down over his face." "I so wish we saw this in the films." "Well, let's not leave them here. They don't add much to the decor." Ron, Harry, and George kicked, rolled, and pushed the unconscious Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle, each of whom looked distinctly the worst for the jumble of jinxes with which they had been hit, out into the corridor, then came back into the compartment and rolled the door shut. "Exploding stuff, anyone?" said Fred, pulling out a pack of cards. "Oh, where can we get a version of that in the real world?" And I like how it just goes to a casual moment right after hilarity. Fred and George, you definitely know how to make people laugh. They were halfway through their fifth game when Harry decided to ask. "You're going to tell us, then," he said to George, "who you were blackmailing?" "Oh," said George, darkly. "That doesn't matter," said Fred, shaking his head impatiently. "It wasn't anything important. Not now, anyway. You've given up. said George, shrugging. But Harry, Ron, and Hermione kept on asking, and finally Fred said, all right. If you really want to know, it's Ludo Bagman. Bagman? Said Harry sharply. Did you say he was involved in... Nah, said George gloomily. Nothing like that. Stupid kid. He didn't have the brains. Well, what then? Said Ron. Fred hesitated, then said, you remember that bet we had with him at the Quidditch World Cup? About how Ireland would win it, but Crumb would get the snitch? Yeah, said Harry and Ron slowly. Well, the kid paid us a leprechaun golden cup from the Irish mascots. So, said Fred impatiently, it vanished, didn't it? By next morning, it had gone. But it must have been an accident, mustn't it? Said Hermione. George laughed very bitterly. Yeah, that's what we thought at first. We thought if we just wrote to him and told him he'd made a mistake, he'd pop up. But nothing doing. Ignored our letter. We kept trying to talk to him about it at Hogwarts, but he was always making some excuse to get away from us. In the end, he turned pretty nasty, said Fred. Told us we were too young to gamble, and he wasn't giving us anything. So we asked for our money back, said George, lowering. He didn't refuse, gasped Hermione. Right in one, said Fred. But that was all your savings, said Ron. Tell me about it, said George. Of course, we found out that he was going on in the end. Lee Jordan's dad had a bit of trouble getting money off Bagman's spell. Turns out he's in big trouble with the goblins. Borrowed loads of gold off them. Again, of them cornered him in the woods after the World Cup, and took all the gold he had. But it still wasn't enough to cover all his debts. They followed him all the way to Hogwarts to keep an eye on him. He's lost everything gambling. Hasn't got 2 galleons rubbed together. And you know how the idiot tried to pay the goblins back? How? Said Harry. He put a bet on you, mate, said Fred. Put a big bet on you to win the tournament. Bet against the goblins. So that's why he kept trying to help me win, said Harry. Well, I did win, didn't I? So he can pay you your gold. Nope, said George, shaking his head. The goblins play as dirty as him. They say you drew with Diggory, and Bagman was betting you'd win outright. So Bagman had to run for it. He did run for it right after the 3rd task. George sighed deeply and started doing up the cards again. The rest of the journey passed pleasantly enough. Harry wished it could have gone all summer. In fact, he never would have arrived at King Cross. But as he had learned the hard way that your time will not slow down when something unpleasant lies ahead. And all too soon, the Hogwarts Express was pulling in at platform 9 3/4. The usual confusion and noise filled the corridors as the students began to disembark. Ron and Hermione struggled out past Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle, carrying their trunks. Harry, however, stayed put. Fred, George, wait a moment. The twins turned. Love the alliteration. Harry pulled his trunk open and drew out his tripod winnings. Take it, he said, and he thrust the sack into George's hands. What? said Fred, looking flabbergasted. Take it, Harry repeated firmly. I don't want it. You're mental, said George, trying to push it back at Harry. No, I'm not, said Harry. You take it and get to inventing. It's for the joke shop. Foreshadowing. He is mental, said Fred in an almost odd voice. Listen, said Harry firmly. If you don't take it, I'm throwing it down the drain. I don't want it, and I don't need it. But I could do with a few laughs. We could all do with a few laughs. I've got a feeling we're going to need them more than usual before long. Foreshadowing. Harry, said George weakly, weighing the money bag in his hands. There's got to be 1,000 galleons in here. Yeah, said Harry, grinning. Think of how many canary creams that is. The twins stared at him. Just don't tell your mom where you got it. Although she might not be so keen for you to join the ministry anymore. Come to think of it. Harry, Fred began, but Harry pulled out his wand. No, he said finally. Take it or I'll hex you. I know some good ones now. Just do me one favor, okay? Buy Ron some different dress robes and say they're from you. I have a headcanon that Ron wore those new dress robes on the day he married his significant other. He left the compartment before they could say another word, stepping over Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle, who were still lying on the floor, covered in hex marks. Uncle Vernon was waiting beyond the barrier. Mrs. Weasley was close by him. She hugged Harry very tightly. Okay. This is me hugging Harry very tightly. And trust me, tight hugs are my specialty. When she saw him and whispered in his ear, I think Dumbledore will let you come to us later in the summer. Keep in touch, Harry. See ya, Harry, said Ron, clapping him on the back. Bye, Harry, said Hermione, and she did something she had never done before, and kissed him on the cheek. Harry, thanks, George muttered while Fred nodded fervently at his side. Harry winked at them, turned to Uncle Vernon, and followed him silently from the station. There was no point in worrying yet, he told himself, as he got into the back of the Dursleys' car. As Hagrid had said, what would come, and he would have to meet it when it did. And that is the end of Goblet of Fire. Thank you again for your huge support, and I hope to see you next week for the start of Order of the Phoenix. Until then, bye!